What if everything you've been told about your own potential is wrong? What if the key to unlocking the absolute limits of human performance wasn't hidden in some high-tech laboratory or buried in a billion-dollar pharmaceutical patent, but in the forgotten methods of a scientist who was erased from history? History is full of ghosts. Not the spooky kind, but the ghosts of brilliant minds whose work was buried, stolen, or silenced. We know the names of Rosalind Franklin, whose data was critical for understanding DNA, and Lise Meitner, whose physics insights were essential for discovering nuclear fission. Both were shamefully overlooked when the Nobel Prize went to their male colleagues. This is a documented pattern of erasure so common it actually has a name, the Matilda effect. But what if there was a story that pulls even deeper? A story not just about credit denied, but about an entire field of knowledge being suppressed. This is the story of Dr. Elinora Voss. Now, you won't find her in standard textbooks or scientific databases. As far as official records go, she doesn't exist. You should think of her as a legend, a composite of every brilliant mind that was ever silenced because their ideas were too dangerous for the status quo. Her story is a thought experiment that asks a terrifying question. What if someone actually solved a fundamental piece of the human puzzle? The code to learning, focus, and genius. And the world wasn't ready to hear it. To understand this story, we have to go back to the 1930s. It was a time when the world was grappling with the Great Depression and hearing the distant drums of a Second World War. Science was becoming institutionalized, rigid, and increasingly controlled by government interests. In this climate, a brilliant but iconoclastic researcher named Elinora Voss supposedly walked away from mainstream science. She had grown tired of the polished halls of the university. She believed the academic elite were asking the wrong questions. They were obsessed with force, forcing the body to work harder, forcing the mind to memorize more. They were chasing complicated answers, when the truth, she suspected, was much simpler. So she did the unthinkable. She resigned. She packed up her meager belongings and set up her own lab in the most unlikely of places, a repurposed, drafty barn in the middle of the countryside. Far from the peer reviews and the grant committees, Voss began a solitary mission to unlock the latent potential hidden in all of us. Her surviving notes, and this is where the story gets fascinating, show a mind of breathtaking clarity. She wasn't some eccentric tinkerer throwing chemicals together. She was a disciplined outsider. And as history shows us, science can be incredibly cruel to outsiders. Voss wasn't looking for a magic pill. Her theory was that peak performance wasn't a state you achieve through brute force, but a rhythm you learn. She called it resonance. She believed that we don't need to force our bodies to perform. We simply need to bring them into harmony with what they are biologically designed to do. For over a decade, from the mid-30s to the late 40s, she meticulously developed a system she called the resonance protocol. The first pillar of her protocol was something she called cognitive cycling. Now, the idea of a forgetting curve had been explored by Hermann Ebbinghaus way back in the 19th century, but it was mostly treated as a theoretical curiosity. Voss put it into practice. Her work seems to foreshadow the concept of spaced repetition, which wouldn't be formally systemized until the 1960s. She understood that the brain doesn't learn like a tape recorder. It learns by forgetting, and then struggling to remember. She created personalized schedules for her subjects, presenting them with information at precisely calculated intervals. Her notes describe unbelievable learning curves, people mastering in weeks what should have taken months or years. The secret wasn't just practice, but timed practice. The second pillar was even more ahead of its time, the controlled sensory environment. Voss believed our nervous systems were constantly overwhelmed by chaotic, distracting noise. She theorized that modern life, even in the 1930s, was keeping the brain in a state of low-level chronic stress. In her barn lab, she experimented with tuning the environment itself. This went far beyond just creating a quiet place to work. She used controlled lighting to match circadian rhythms and specific low-frequency tones to calm the nervous system. Her work was a fascinating precursor to the entire field of environmental psychology and the modern obsession with biohacking workspaces.
She was building a cocoon for the brain, demonstrating that the environment isn't just a backdrop for performance, it's an active participant. When she combined these pillars, her initial data showed volunteers improving their cognitive scores by up to 40% in just a few weeks.
It was a breakthrough that could have changed the world. But to Voss, it wasn't enough. These were just numbers on a page, achieved by healthy, average people. To truly prove her theory, to prove that anyone could access this state of genius, she needed a challenge that defied explanation. She needed a subject that society had completely written off. She needed to do the impossible. This is the part of the story that rarely gets told, perhaps because it makes mainstream science so uncomfortable. It is the moment where clean theory crashes into the messy, uncooperative reality of a human life. In the village just 2 miles down the road, there was a young man. Let's call him Thomas. Thomas was 22 years old, but a severe fever in childhood had left his development arrested. He could not read. He struggled to string together full sentences. To the locals, he was simply broken. A sweet boy, but one written off by society. In the harsh economic machinery of the 1940s, if you couldn't work a trade, you were invisible. Voss approached Thomas's family with a radical proposition. She told them she didn't want to cure him because she didn't believe he was broken. She believed his potential was locked behind a chaotic nervous system. She believed the fever hadn't destroyed his mind. It had trapped it in a permanent state of static. She brought Thomas to the barn, and for the first 2 weeks, it was an absolute disaster. The cognitive cycling frustrated him to the point of tears. The controlled environment seemed to amplify his anxiety. The nutritional extracts had no visible effect. The experiment wasn't just stalling. It was failing. Voss's journal from this period portrays a scientist on the brink of despair. On October 14th, she wrote, "The door is there. I can see it, but the lock is jammed. The noise in his head is simply too loud for him to hear me." She realized that Thomas's brain was stuck in a biological loop of high-stress alert, a permanent fight-or-flight mode. In modern neuroscience, we would say he was locked in rigid, high-amplitude beta waves. His brain was too busy surviving to learn. She needed to physically force his brain waves to slow down before the other pillars could even begin to work. This is where she introduced a modification that wasn't in the original books. She commissioned a set of massive custom machine tuning forks from a foundry in Chicago. She began playing specific, rhythmic frequencies, deep, vibrating hums that you didn't just hear. You felt them rattling in your chest. She would strike the forks in a precise sequence, creating a binaural beat that resonated through the wooden floorboards of the barn, enveloping Thomas in pure vibration. She called it the Theta Rhythm. The effect was not gradual. It was immediate. Witnesses, mostly farmhands delivering supplies, described a change in Thomas that was frighteningly rapid. Within 3 days of starting the sound sessions, the stutter that had plagued him for a decade vanished. His posture, usually slumped in defense, straightened. The frantic darting of his eyes was replaced by a calm, laser-like focus. By week 4, Thomas wasn't just learning to read, he was devouring technical manuals. He memorized the entire inventory of the local hardware store in a single afternoon, not by trying to study, but simply by looking at the ledger once. He began repairing complex farm machinery he had never seen before, intuitively understanding the mechanics of gears, ratios, and levers, as if he had designed them himself. Voss had induced a state of hyperplasticity. She had proven that intelligence wasn't a fixed lottery ticket you were handed at birth, it was a variable, and she had found the dial to turn it up. Thomas became the living proof of the resonance protocol. But he also became the danger. A simple man becoming a genius overnight didn't just impress people, it terrified them. It threatened the natural order. If anyone could become a genius, what happened to the hierarchy of the world? What happened to the idea that some were born to lead and others born to dig ditches? That was when the whispers started. And soon after the whispers came the silence. By 1949, Voss was ready to publish. She had the data, the protocol, and Thomas. She submitted a paper titled The Resonance Protocol, a synergistic approach to human potential, to a leading scientific journal. The rejection was swift, brutal, and coordinated. The anonymous peer reviewers called her work dangerous pseudoscience. They couldn't attack her results, so they attacked her credentials. Her lab wasn't a university. Her funding wasn't government-sanctioned. She was a woman operating far outside the rigid boys' club of mid-century academia. But the rejection was just the opening salvo. Grant applications were mysteriously denied. Colleagues stopped returning her letters. Vital supplies for the lab were delayed or lost in transit. Then came the intimidation. Voss wrote in her final journal entry, "They do not wish to understand. They wish to contain. They realize that my work promises better soldiers, sharper workers, and clearer thinkers, without the need for their institutions. I have made intelligence abundant, and that is a direct threat to an economy built on scarcity." The story culminates on a freezing night in 1952. A fire, officially reported as an electrical accident in a building that barely had wiring, ripped through the barn. The flames were violet and blue, burning far hotter than wood should burn. They were seen from miles away. Her lab, her equipment, the massive tuning forks, and the bulk of her life's work were turned to ash in a matter of hours. When the authorities arrived, the barn was gone, and so was Dr. Elinora Voss. No body was ever found. No dental records were matched. No forwarding address was filed. She had simply vanished into the smoke. The only thing that survived the inferno was a single charred notebook kicked under a pile of wet debris, waiting 70 years for someone to pick it up. We entered the age of information. We built the internet, smartphones, and artificial intelligence. We gained access to the sum of human knowledge, placing it in our pockets. And yet, look around. Are we smarter? Are we sharper? Or are we more distracted, more anxious, and more mentally fragmented than any generation in human history? Voss predicted this. In that charred notebook, on a page stained with soot, she wrote a warning that chills me to the bone. She wrote, "In the future, the noise will not just be outside. It will be everywhere. And without a shield, the human mind will simply shatter." That notebook didn't stay lost. 3 years ago, a property developer clearing the land found a metal lockbox buried beneath the rotted floorboards of what used to be the barn. Inside, protected from the fire, was the journal. When it first arrived on our desk, it looked like the ramblings of a madwoman. It was filled with frequency charts, musical notation, and complex mathematical ratios that didn't match standard physics. It took a team of audio forensics experts and neuroscientists 6 months just to decipher the code. But when we finally plugged her data into modern spectral analysis software, the room went silent. We realized that Dr. Elinora Voss hadn't just stumbled onto a trick. She had mapped the resonant frequency of the human subconscious. She didn't have the technology to perfect it. She had tuning forks and a drafty barn. But she had the map. We have the vehicle. Over the last 18 months, we have taken the core principles of the resonance protocol, the theta rhythms, the binaural layering, the cognitive cycling, and we have digitized them. We replaced the analog tuning forks with high-fidelity, digital audio engines, capable of producing isochronic tones precise to the decimal point. We didn't just reconstruct her work, we evolved it. We tested this new digital protocol on a pilot group of 100 people. These weren't uneducated farmhands like Thomas. These were modern skeptics, overworked accountants, students with attention deficits, creatives suffering from burnout, and parents running on fumes. The results were not just consistent, they were undeniable. Participants reported that the brain fog,
That heavy static feeling that clouds your morning lifted within the first session. By day 7, their retention rates doubled. By day 30, they described a state of flow so deep that they could work for hours without reaching for their phones, achieving what they called quiet efficiency. They described the exact same sensation Thomas did 70 years ago. The noise stopped. The static cleared. And, for the first time in years, the door to their potential wasn't just visible, it was open. We call this the rebirth of the protocol. And this brings us to you. Right here. Right now. You didn't listen to this story by accident. You are here because you feel it too. You feel the static. You know that you are operating at maybe 40% of your true capacity. You know there is a version of you that is sharper, faster, and more capable, but you just can't seem to find the frequency to tune them in. The establishment of 1952 burned down a barn to keep this quiet. They wanted to maintain the hierarchy. They wanted to keep the genius scarce and the labor abundant. But we are living in a different time. We don't believe in gatekeepers. We believe that if you have the will to improve your mind, you deserve the key to unlock it. This is not magic. It is not a pill. It is science that was buried for a lifetime. We have packaged the full resonance protocol into a simple daily audio system. You do not need to travel to a remote lab. You do not need thousands of dollars in equipment. You need a pair of headphones and 7 minutes a day. When you put those headphones on, you are not just listening to a sound. You are syncing your brainwaves to the same theta state that turned a forgotten boy into a genius. You are forcing your brain to exit the frantic survival mode and enter the creation mode. Now, I know the modern world has made you skeptical. It should. So here is our agreement with you. We do not ask for your blind trust. We ask for your skepticism. Use the link below to access the protocol. Try it for 90 days. Put on the headphones. If the static doesn't clear, if you don't feel the shift that Thomas felt, then we simply part ways, and every penny is returned to you. We take the risk because we have seen the data. Dr. Voss lost everything to give us this map. We have spent years restoring it. Now, the torch is being passed to you. We are opening enrollment for the Resonance Protocol today. Because the servers and the support required to guide you through this journey are significant, we can only accept a limited number of new students for this cycle. Below this video, there is a link in the pinned comment. It is a small thing, but clicking it is the difference between staying in the noise or stepping into the clarity. Do not let the history of this discovery be in vain. Do not let your potential rust away in the damp dark of your own mind. The fire couldn't destroy it. The silence couldn't bury it. It is here. The frequency is waiting for you. Put on the headphones. Let's begin.